And similarly, the Chama thing, right? What you have is a community level mandate to the blockchain,
yes,
rather than a sort of sovereign level mandate to the blockchain.
Yes,
it's a much more legally contained, intelligible use of the technology, rather than this kind of like, we're going to issue a new global currency with the central bank of the internet thing, which is the Bitcoin mindset.
Yeah, you have a very small feedback loop. So when it goes wrong, you stop.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're talking about the state level thing, when it goes wrong, you double down.
And it just rolls and rolls and rolls.
And it rolls and rolls and rolls until we're all broke. So coming back to Chama and the way that they do dispute resolution, they have the same problem that everybody else in Africa or Latin America has, or some parts of Asia. That the courts are both unreliable at the macro scale, at the large scale dispute resolution process, because they are corruptible, if you like. And the other thing is that they're totally inaccessible to people on $2 a day.
Oh, that's interesting.
You do not get to resolve a dispute if you're not a relatively well-off person, because you can't afford to talk to a lawyer,
right,
and you can't afford to even necessarily make the trip to the courthouse or file the first brief.
You literally just can't get into the system.
You aren't. Yeah. It's completely shut out for you. So the locals have a very strong sense of community, and they also have, if not in practice, but certainly within their minds or their memories, the notion of tribal elders. So consequently, there's always somebody you can go to if you need to resolve a dispute. There's always a sense that we could do this or we could do that, etc., etc.
So the Chama is basically constituted on the sort of community's cooperative agreement, and then that comes with a shared model of dispute resolution. So that's coming baked into the social tier, and they're already using that on paper.
Yes, but it's not explicit. The sense there is that when we started talking about arbitration and dispute resolution as a formal process, they all automatically understood it, but they hadn't experienced it in such a formal fashion before.
So as things just are sort of getting hashed out.
In the sense that they worry about the disputes when they happen, and they don't have this, shall we say, contractual sense, where in your contract you write a clause that refers to dispute resolution to a particular forum,
right,
which is what we in the West do customarily. They would not do that, because in a sense they don't have a forum where they can take their disputes, so they don't bother to imagine it up front.
Right.
However, if you come to them with a forum that works, they're quite happy to adopt it, because they know the existing forum isn't for them.
Right.
So we found it was actually extraordinarily easy in comparison to the West. Selling Western communities on arbitration is a hard one. It's
because really hard. They think they've got access to the courts already.
Yes, and they think their courts will protect them, and they think that their courts will look after them.
Yeah.
Now that can't possibly be true, because when you go to court, one party has to lose and one party has to win.
Right.
So somebody's not going to be protected.
Yes. Chris Ray talks about this, that up front everybody wants the most severe possible sanction, because they never imagine they'll be the one in default.
That's right. Yes, exactly. So there's this very big perception that our courts are good, and especially if you go to the larger the country gets, the more the belief in their own legal system.
Sure.
So explaining how to do dispute resolution at a community level is very hard in the West, and it's a hard sell.
Because in a sense, that was a system that we kind of migrated away from hundreds of years ago.
Yes.
I'm thinking of like the old days, I don't know whether this is true or not, but where the jury was the first 12 men that came out of church that morning.
Right, kind of something like that, yes. So there's all these practices that we've gradually got away from. And if you go back into the old days, the court was, for example, a franchise, and somebody owned the franchise, and the executioner was a franchise, and somebody owned the job of executing, and that was their income. So we got away from that system. We went to a more state-oriented model, because that was thought to be more independent, and standards could improve, which it does in many respects, in many places.
I mean, it's relatively uniform justice.
Yes.
It might have the same, it has roughly the same error rate at all tiers.
Yes.
Not that the small claim stuff is junk and the high level stuff is pretty good.
Right.
To a fair degree, it's got about the same error rate regardless of the size of the case.
Yes.
Which is not bad. It's an achievement. But it doesn't help you in Kenya.
Doesn't help us in Kenya. So in Kenya, we found it a relatively easy sell to put in place an arbitration framework. Now, the trick that is probably the thing that will be immediately striking the Western mind is how can they possibly afford arbitration? The answer is you use them to provide the arbitrators.
Right.
You get the communities themselves to provide an arbitrator.
Right.
And we simply, when we did it in practice, we had we simply chose the president of the Chama to be one arbitrator, and I was chosen to be the other arbitrator. So they gave us 2 arbitrators in a Chama of 30 people.
Yeah.
Now, the next thing is, of course, that if you do get into some sort of violent debate about funds have been stolen or whatever, our Chama might not be able to adjudicate that.
Right.
So we can go to the next Chama and pull the arbitrator from there and use that person who's now independent to listen to the sides and come up with a determination.
And you could go as far out across that social graph as you need to till you hit somebody that everybody reads as independent.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
Yes, and so that's where we're sort of aiming for in the future. We're obviously not there by any stretch of the imagination, but the job, part of being in the community is that you have to provide, if you like, jury service, but in this case, arbitral service, so that at some stage you might think, I'm happily doing my stuff, but suddenly you get called upon to be an arbitrator.
Everything, something's gone wrong.
Yes. And that's what being part of a community is. You have to support the community when it gets into trouble.
Right, and this is part of the responsibility that people take on in the initial contractual arrangement. In Western business context, there is generally speaking no underlying living system that is transacting before the contracts are in place. Generally speaking, people might agree that there's going to be a deal, but stuff doesn't start happening until the paperwork is done. And our lawyers generally enforce that pretty strictly.
If you're in that frame of mind.
If you're in that frame of mind. Right?
Yes.
So the sort of notion then is that the software is fitted to the paperwork and the paperwork is fitted to the business process.
Yes.
But none of it really interacts with any kind of fundamental social structure.
No.
So what we have is a much longer bridge between the cryptography and the thing.
Yes.
Because the thing is even 1 or 2 more steps less mechanistic than contract law.
Yes.
Yeah, I do like your challenges.
and that is one of the key things, which is now emerging. Something we've worked out back at 2000 or so. To make this work, to make it work properly, you have to start from the community aspect, or more precisely, you have to start from the communication aspect.
Interesting.
So the starting point for building this process is not digital cash; it's actually digital chat. In the sense that you want to build your community around messaging.
Right.
We message back and forth, and you just think, we're going to organise next week's Chama meeting. What is that? It's a series of messages going back and forth. And on top of that, you build your digital cash system or your digital asset system.
Right. Okay, so this is quite similar to the thinking inside of Status, Economic Space Agency. Lots of folks are coming to this convergence idea that the money passes along the conversational channel.
Yes.
I think
exactly.
I think even Google might have turned on a payment rail in their chat app.
Well, everybody's doing it now, but the idea has been around for a long time. I first read about it in 2000 or so.
Wow.
And I actually figured it out in 2000. And you might remember that Skype was sold to eBay.
This is the traditional me and Grigg 15-year one. Well, a generation ago I told you exactly how this ought to be done.
15 years of pain, yes. So Skype was sold to eBay for that purpose.
Oh.
eBay were having trouble with their PayPal unit, so they thought, why don't we put it into a cryptographically secure framework?
Yeah.
And remember, Skype in the mid-2000s was the word in security.
Absolutely.
Now, if you take Skype and you take the messaging, well, you've got secure delivery, secure and reliable delivery of messaging. How hard is it to stick a cache in that? That's what they wanted to do. But they didn't. That's
another story.
It's another story, yes.
Which leaves this enormous wide open space.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we have the governance in the form of the community appoints a dispute resolution agent in that environment.
Yes.
You've got the chat logs which tell people what was promised and what was said and who's going to do what.
Exactly.
Right.
And all of this has got at least some solid cryptographic backing to it. So
and there's
not
an evidence chain in there.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I mean, this all seems like it's circling around something, which is, of course, identity. How do we know who's who inside of this system?
Yes. Well, it turns out that one's a solved issue.
It is.
Oh, yes.
Phone numbers.
The community knows everybody.
Okay.
When you
yes.
form a chama,
it's only...
you only form it with people you know very well.
Right. Because money's on the table in a low-trust environment.
That's right. Exactly. So the community has identity already wrapped up.
Right.
The only thing they've got to do is record it in some fashion. Now, it turns out to be pretty trivial. In Kenya, the rule is you have to have sufficient details of the Kenya ID. So if there's a government-issued ID, you're done.
Okay.
And because a chama is a very light-scale thing, we're not talking KYC and AML and anything like that. This is just a savings club.
Yeah.
So we don't actually need to do very much.
Right.
So they have this very lightweight rule. But actually, you can go a lot further because, of course, you can't take the Kenya ID or a passport or whatever, and you can't just sort of distribute it willy-nilly outside the chama. But what you can do is capture information about who is there, and you can make a summary record, if you like. The chama itself can become an authority.
Say a little more about that. So you somehow have almost like voting inside of the chama on who's who? Or
No, well...
Say a little more. I didn't quite understand that.
Yeah, so of course, the problem, or the desire that certainly in the West people have about identity is that they want to go to some institution, like a government or a corporation or, an Uber driver or something like that, and present something that suddenly makes it all good.
Yeah, absolutely. This notion that you have a hard identity credential, you bang your passport on the table, and there are no further questions about who you are.
The default or the knee-jerk answer to that is you bang your passport on the table, and now everything is hunky-dory.
Yeah.
But actually, that doesn't really measure up in terms of risk analysis, because if I put down a passport from one country and you're from another country, now what happens if we break a deal for $1,000 or something like that? Are you going to pursue me to another country?
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't work.
You're outside the records bubble.
Yeah. And in fact, even if you think about the process in the local community, a court case at the local magistrates' courts is going to cost you $1,000. So what's happening is that the identity document has become an expectation, but it's not actually delivering the trust or recourse that you want.
Because you think it's a promise of enforcement, and it's actually not. Even if we know who this guy is, we're not going to do anything.
And you can take it to the extreme. So if you talk about, say, the Germans or the Swiss or something like that, my name is my bond. If you've presented your name and a passport, that's it. They will act very well. But if you go to South America or places in India and so forth, and you get somebody's name, is that going to be much use to you? Probably not, especially if they spot you as a foreigner.
Sure.
So the issue is not the identity. The issue is, how do I get recourse for something going wrong?
Right.
Now, coming back to the chamas, we all know who everybody is in the chamas. If I can present to you a fairly good indication that I come from a particular chama, and that chama is in the network.
Okay, so the chama is the namespace.
Yes.
You are Bob of Truck Chama.
There you go.
Right? This is Helen of Farm Chama.
Yes.
This is Fred of Weaving Chama, or whatever they are.
Yes.
And you have this namespace, so the people are connected, which is probably exactly what they did in the villages. It's certainly what the Scots did.
Bob Smith is Bob the Smithy, literally, and Bob from that particular village. That's how it was done in the old days.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if I come to you and I give you credible evidence, phones, crypto, and so forth, that I'm of a particular chama,
right,
and you know that chama's in the network,
got it.
you now know that you can go for recourse.
And this is kind of community level DNS.
Yes, and you don't need to know my name.
And the chama has a bunch of assets.
Exactly. Skin in the game.
So somebody comes and represents themselves as being from a particular chama. The chama has authorized them to use that credential. They go to another chama to rent a truck, buy a truck, whatever it is they're doing.
Do some trade, do some business.
Done, something goes wrong, and you go to the chama and say, hey, this person that you warranted, this person has gone with my truck.
Yes.
Investigations proceed.
And now we've got people, we've got assets, we've got evidence, etc., etc.
So you begin to build accountability,
Yes.
and presumably if somebody doesn't honour their warrants,
Yes,
black mark against Chama as a whole, which impedes their ability to trade.
yes. And we did all that without your identity.
Yeah. You know Matthew Schutte of Holochain?
No, I'm afraid not.
So he is a big advocate of what he calls discretionary enforcement. So he says there's basically two ways that you can punish people who misbehave. The first is to go around and take their stuff. The other is to not give them more stuff in future.
Yes.
Sanction the past, sanction the future. If you
Right.
just refuse to trade,
Yes.
that in itself is sanction if it's comprehensive enough.
Yes.
And he's got this whole kind of model that this stuff worked inside of the small village level, but it doesn't scale because we don't have the right machinery.
Right.
He thinks Holochain is that machinery.
Yes.
And I have my doubts about whether Holochain is that machinery, but his analysis is very strong.
Right. And a whole lot of stuff actually does work inside the village and then stops working outside the village.
Magic Dunbar number.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's kind of, that's why Chamas are that number. Because they're limited by Dunbar number.
And this is the universal thing, right? Informal systems of enforcement.
Yes.
You're always going to hit this hard limit, which is how much space do you have to remember who's in your good books and who's in your bad books.
That's right. But if we can do that at the Chama level, if I can be part of a Chama, and that Chama's good word is now put at risk,
Right.
now I start to behave because it's my Chama.
Right.
The amount of skill in the game that I have when I represent my Chama, when I represent myself as coming from my Chama,
right.
is very high.
And you're wedged between the people you're doing business with and the people that you're representing.
That's
in
right.
a way that theoretically causes straight deals.
Yes.
So really, the hope here is you basically engineer a transition from a low trust society to a high trust society using crypto,
Yes.
which would presumably double the economic efficiency of the economy or something crazy.
It would add percentage points to the economy,
Wow.
just like M-Pesa did.
Yeah.
M-Pesa did that because it enabled one leg of the trade to move reliably and seamlessly from person to person. Before M-Pesa, what would happen is you take an envelope, stick cash in it, hand it to a driver of a matatu. The matatu would drive half an hour, or even 10 hours sometimes, get to the other end, hand the envelope to a tuk-tuk, a bike guy, and he would take it the next leg to the supplier.
Cash by post.
Cash by post. Well, cash by informal transport network, not even by post.
Wow.
So it was unreliable, and you can imagine the arguments that would happen when it disappeared or didn't get there, etc., etc. Now, the only reason it worked, it turns out, or so we are told. I hope they correct us on this, but the only reason it worked was because the matatus are owned by Chamas.
Oh, there you go.
And the matatu driver was now representing the Chama in carrying the envelope.
So the Chama
supplier.
had always been
Yes.
the fundamental trust structure.
Yes.
So taking existing social structures,
Yes.
reinforcing the existing local social structures with crypto,
Yes.
so that the internal credentials can be used externally.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
That's the solution.
So let me run over that again, because that's very complex new thinking.
Yes.
I think a lot of people watching this will just be like, what did he say?
Yeah.
So, informal trust structures at about a 30-person scale, which are already handling funds on behalf of their members. So in a sense, they are like a regulated financial body would be here, but they're being warranted by their community rather than being warranted by their state.
Yes. Yes.
So you have a system of financial agency. This person is the financial agent of this other 30 people.
Yes.
If they misbehave, we will be righteously annoyed.
Yes.
Then that structure, traditionally not that fungible, because if you don't know those people already, you don't know whether Fred is actually from that Chama or not, because the Chama doesn't have an easy way of extending credentials.
Exactly.
So you add a digital credentialing system which takes the pre-existing trust structure
Yes.
and makes it easy to extend the trust in a geographical sense.
Yes.
Right. So that then enables what?
It enables commerce in the sense that you can now safely deal with a Chama on the other side of the country
So you
without having met them before.
get Ricardian advantage. You can trade with people that are less like you, which
Yes.
means that you've got more advantage from trade.
Yes.
You've got tons and tons and tons of rice, they've got tons and tons of wheat, because they're at the other end of the country, whereas all your neighbours are also growing rice.
That's right.
So further away, the further people are across the social graph, the more likely it is the trade will be commercially useful,
Yes.
but the harder it is to perform.